Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to make some crispy Italian chicken with a creamy sun-dried tomato pasta and bake up a fresh loaf of our sourdough bread. So I've made this batch yesterday and I've had it proofing in the fridge since last night. So we're going to score it and carefully pull this guy off, and we're going to put it in our Dutch oven that I have nice and hot. Didn't quite flour enough right there, but that's okay. Okay, let's give this guy a nice big score. I always love it when my little blade comes off. Okay, there we go. So we're going to have our good expansion score, and then I'm just going to take that flour, kind of rub it over so it will be a nice kind of book. And then we're just going to do, again, just a really simple wheat leaf design for this. And I always just love when we do pasta having fresh bread because I think it's just so delicious. Let me just get these redone. Apparently, I put all the flour in one spot and not on the part where it's stuck. Okay, let's get this guy in the oven. Put my lid over here. My Dutch oven is nice and hot. I had it preheating for the last, I would say, 40 minutes. Ever since I walked in the house at around 7:45, I turned my oven on to 500 and had it preheating. And we're going to get it baking up here. So it's in here. We're going to bake it at 500 for 20 minutes with the lid on. Then we're going to take the lid off and we're going to bake it for 20 minutes with the lid off at 450. So let's pop it in here. And let me set my timer. And now let's start prepping our dinner.
Oh, Robin says she made your apple turnovers today.
Oh, I hope you guys enjoyed them. I always love it when I hear that people have made one of my dishes and that they liked them. You know, I'm always afraid somebody's not going to like something I've created, but I hope they were delicious. I don't care about your salmon dislike. We're eating salmon. Okay, I'm going to prep up my chicken for our kind of crispy. We're going to do like an Italian seasoning on it. My son really wanted fried chicken, so I was like, okay, well, we can do fried chicken. He could eat fried chicken every single day. He asked for steak first, and I said, no, I don't have steak. And he's like, how about fried chicken? I was like, sure. Didn't know what I was cooking anyways. So let's get these filleted up. So I'm going to kind of cut them in half here, get them nice and a little bit thinner. I'm going to actually, some of these are pretty thick, so I might even, I might actually get my hammer out and hammer some of them. This one is really, really thick that I'm actually going to not just fillet it in half, I'm going to fillet it in thirds. Otherwise, they won't cook up evenly. When you're kind of doing, make sure you cut against the grain so that you get a nice tender piece of chicken. Cutting against the grain, and the grain is essentially the fibers and the meat, is going to give you a more tender and delicious chicken. Again, this is a really big chicken breast, so I'm going to cut it again one more time, because if you leave your chicken too thick and fat, what's going to happen is you're more likely to burn your outer, crispy crust than before you get your chicken cooked all the way through. So I try to aim. So these are all pretty good. And this guy's a little bit fat, so I'm going to get my mallet out and hammer him just a little bit to make him a little bit thinner so that they're all about even, and that way they'll kind of cook up evenly. Most of the time, they're, sometimes you just get these really, really big chicken breasts. So just want to make them a little bit thinner. And this will also make them nice and tender. This one's a little fat too. Wasn't fat enough quite for me to do it into thirds, but just a little extra work. Beautiful. You know what? Let me grab my knife again, because I'm going to actually cut these a little bit smaller so that they're not super huge for our thing. This one's going to be a really long strip. Okay. And the reason I'm doing this is so that they're easier to dredge. They're not super huge on here. There we go. So even though this was just 2 chicken breasts, it's going to make a lot of fried chicken. Right, let me wash my hands up real quick. I'm going to grab a fork while I'm over here. And let's start mixing up our dredge for our chicken here. So I've got eggs and I've got a bowl, and we're going to make our seasoned dredge. So let's start with our flour. I'm going to put in about 2 cups of flour, between 1.5 to 2 cups. I just kind of do my cup fuller and I kind of fill it up. 2 things. You always want to err on the side of having slightly more flour and dredge than having less, because you don't want to have to, in the middle of your cooking, have to add in more. And then my water here is at a good boil, so let's drop our pasta in before I forget about it. I'm kind of sad if I forget my pasta. That's the main part of our dish tonight. Open up. We're doing radiatore pasta, which are kind of just like little balls or little radius, if you want to go with the Latin word. And these, since they are a denser pasta, they do take a little bit longer to cook, about 10 to 12 minutes to get to that al dente. So we're going to pop them in here. I'm going to do the whole bag in here, because again, they are a smaller kind of pasta noodle, and I have a feeling my kids are going to really enjoy them. And then I'm going to use just a little bit of our pasta water in our sauce. So I'm just going to add a little bit of salt. Just about, 2 pinches full, around a teaspoon and a half-ish of it. And then I'm going to turn it up to really, really high. I like to have it come to a nice boil at around like a 6. And that way, when I've dropped the pasta in, I can turn it up even higher, which will bring it back to that boil a lot quicker. Let's give them a good stir, because you don't want any of them to stick to the bottom of your pot. And while that's doing, let's finish up our breading here. So we've got about 2 cups of flour in here. We're going to add in about a tablespoon and a half of onion powder. It's going to give it a really nice savory flavor. And then we're going to add in about a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of oregano, dried oregano. A good amount. I really love oregano in like fried chicken. It's just a lovely spice, especially if we're going to go with an Italian theme. The oregano is really nice. And then we're going to add in about a tablespoon of Italian seasoning. So a really good amount. And err on the side again of having too much spice versus too little, because you don't want a bland chicken. And now we're going to add in our salt. Since this is going to be what seasons it up and it's not all going to stick to it, you're going to put in about a tablespoon of garlic salt. Now, if you don't have garlic salt, you're going to do about like 1.5 teaspoons of salt with about 1.5 teaspoons of garlic powder. So lots of good shakes over here, but you definitely don't want it to be bland, because remember, this is just going to be coating the outside of the chicken, which is going to give it its great seasoning, but it needs to be well seasoned. So we've got that. We're going to give this a little bit of a stir on here. And again, I'm just keeping it fairly simple. And then after we do our first kind of dredging, I am going to put in some seasoned panko breadcrumbs. So just mix it up. A lot of times, especially if you're using like a bowl, the spices like to go out to the corners. So I always just like to make sure it's well mixed so that it evenly coats onto our chicken. There we go. So we've got our well-seasoned dredge. And then I'm going to use 4 eggs here, because I don't think 3 is going to quite cut it. And I want to err on the side of having, again, a bit too much versus needing to add another egg halfway through. Because once you start that dredging process, you definitely don't want to have to go and add to it, because it just makes it a bit more challenging. I'm going to pop my yolks here. And I always find it, make sure you pop them first before you start to whip them, because it's just going to mix them up a lot faster. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing a yolk in there. And you just want to mix it until you don't have any big stringy egg whites, because what you don't want to have is when you're dipping your chicken into the egg wash, you don't want to pull up with this big, like snotty piece of egg white like that, because then that's just going to be gross on your chicken when it goes to frying. So just, again, a good mixture. Okay, I think those are all pretty much broken up. Beautiful. Now, I'm going to prep my panko breadcrumbs, just having them to the side with the lid off. And my trick here is you want to just work with one hand. So keep one hand for touching the meat and one hand being clean. So this is going to be my clean hand. And we're going to go through and we're going to first dredge everything up in our seasoned dredge. And then we'll add our panko breadcrumbs in, and then we will do into the egg batter and back into the dredge the second time. Now, if you prefer a thinner kind of crust on your chicken, you could just leave it as this and then fry it up. It will just give you a really thin crust. It won't be like a crispy chicken, but it will give you that just a little crunch on it. Now, if you like the crunchier, then of course go into the egg and then back into the dredging with the panko breadcrumbs. But you definitely, if you're going to do the double kind of layer of the flour base, make sure that the first layer does not have the panko breadcrumbs in it. You need it to be just the smooth flour with the spices in it. Otherwise, those breadcrumbs aren't going to stick on it at all. And this is really, again, an important part to do the dredging first, because when you dip the flour coated pieces of chicken, so that's called the dredged chicken, into the eggs, that's going to essentially create like a natural glue, a binder that will allow the next layer of the breading to stick on, and that will allow it to stay on during the frying process and all that jazz. So just about got all of this. And again, it's crazy if you look at it. This was just 2 chicken breasts that I filleted and kind of hammered some of them out to be thinning up. But as you see, it actually is going to make quite a lot of chicken. Now we're going to add in about a cup of panko breadcrumbs, which is about what I have left on here. I prefer the seasoned because it adds, again, an extra layer of spice, but you can also use plain, and you can use just traditional breadcrumbs. Now, the difference between panko breadcrumbs and traditional is panko is going to give you the bigger crunch, the more crisp, while the traditional breadcrumbs are going to give you a more fine breading. Here we go. So we've got those mixed in, and let's go and we'll do our little into it. And again, try to do this with just one hand so that you have a hand free for working and cleaning and doing anything you need.
You have a question? Have you ever made yuca fries?
You know what? I've only cooked with yuca a few times, and most of the time it's just been in stews. So I haven't actually made fries from it, but it would make really delicious fried fries. But I've only ever done it in stews, mainly because you can't really get yuca really available here in our grocery stores. And the only place I can really get it is in the freezer section, which isn't going to be as good for making fries out of, but it is delicious. Here we go. So again, we're going to coat this up. And for people like yuca root, it's like a starchy kind of white base to it. It kind of resembles the look of a potato, but it has a different flavor profile, but it is delicious. Here we go. Let's kind of coat this guy up and into it. And you can see how each one is going to grow in size, which is why, again, I made sure I trimmed them down to smaller pieces, because otherwise you'd have fillets that are like this big, which I know I'm sure plenty of people in my family would be happy with it. But it's like going to the Cheesecake Factory, and anytime you get like their chicken Bellagio or their Louisiana chicken, spicy chicken pasta, it's always this massive piece of chicken on the top. So I like to make it a little bit more manageable. I almost was going to do a copycat of either the chicken Bellagio or the spicy Louisiana chicken from, you know, um, or not Chick-fil-A, from Cheesecake Factory, but I just opted to do this instead.
You have a question? What's the seasoning and the flour?
So the seasoning, we kind of went with an Italian theme with it because it's going to kind of fit our pasta. And what we used is about a tablespoon of onion powder, about a tablespoon of garlic salt, about a teaspoon and a half of oregano, dried oregano, and then about a tablespoon of Italian seasoning. So really just all the flavors kind of will complement each other well, and it's going to go with our pasta. And that's where when I'm making different like fried chicken, cutlets or fried pork tenderloins or fish, I always like my seasoning to kind of pair with what the flavors of the meal are. So if I'm going with a Cajun, then of course I would use Cajun seasonings. And I'll vary it there, or I'll use, like, if it's just a plain one, I'll use my basic, like, Mrs. Dash's original blend as the base for it. Here we go. Again, this is why you keep them separate, because you're going to have breaded fingers. And it's this way, when I can go to wash my hands, I'm not completely coated and then getting my whole kitchen covered in, chicken breading. And this method, and the way I do it this way, instead of like putting it in a bag and then shaking it with the things like the traditional, I feel like the 90s, we grew up with shake and bake, is that's going to give you a finer, thinner crust on it. This method where we do a dip and then I kind of pat it down is going to give you a nice, thicker, crispy level to our chicken cutlets here. And my kids really, really love the crunchy chicken. Now, this isn't KFC's extra crunchy, but it's a good one that I feel like gives the perfect amount of crunch to it without being overboard. Okay, we've got one more in here. Say, we've got a big family, so, at home, even though I want to point out this was only 2 chicken breasts. Here we go. And that's also one thing. I feel like a lot of people overestimate the amount of meat you need or the amount of food you need for like a large group of people. And a lot of times people will just over make a large amount. We're going to be feeding 7 tonight, and I'm pretty certain there's going to be leftovers for my parents tomorrow. Okay, let me wash my hands up real quick. Take a peek. We got about 5 minutes before our sourdough is ready. Just get my fingers completely decoated. Okay.
You have a question? How do you get the chicken evenly cooked?
So the trick is I'm going to heat up my oil on high, and then I'm going to turn it to a medium right before I drop it in. And you want to cook it low and slow in your oil. If you cook it too high, you're going to burn your crust before your center gets cooked. And if you cook it with cold oil, you're going to have soggy chicken that's never going to crisp up. Now, I'm going to cook mine in olive oil because I love olive oil, and I think it gives a really one thing. You don't need to have a whole bunch of oil that your whole chicken is submerged. You just need that bottom layer because we're going to flip it over, and we made sure that we thin these out so they're not super thick. I like this method because we're not going to be wasting as much oil. So, it might take a little bit longer to cook because we're going to have to cook them on both sides, but that also allows it to cook more evenly and cook all the way through, because as it's frying up from the bottom, it's cooking all the way through. That side is still hot, continuing to cook while we flip it over to the other side, which allows you to have a really nice and juicy, tender chicken for it. Also, making sure that you fillet your chicken in half to where you have a thinner cut of meat is going to allow it to cook more evenly and not as long. Now, if you want to do fried chicken that's like, drumsticks or whatnot, I always do a parboil on those because they're thicker cuts of meat. And a parboil is where you drop them into water and you boil them for about 5 minutes to start the cooking process. Okay, as this is heating up, let me check my noodles here. They don't think they've been in quite long enough to be cooked all the way through yet, but I'm going to test them. And they're very, very hot. This is a noodle that the only way you can really tell is biting through it. Still needs about a minute or two. And I'm looking for about right at the edge of al dente. You don't want it to go over because we are going to be throwing this into a sauce, and therefore we want it to be nice, like the kind of the perfect cook through. I'm going to chop up my onions and get them prepped so that we can saute them for our pasta because we'll want them to caramelize here. And I'm just going to slice them thin, but then I'm going to cut them kind of small because I want them to really blend in with our pasta. And since we're doing the radiatore, we want to make sure that it isn't overpowering. I want the little bits of onions to collect on it versus being like a big chunk. Okay, let me grab a ladle and we're going to steal some of this pasta water. Here we go. And we need I'm not sure I'm going to even use a whole cup, but I'm going to take about a cup of pasta water to reserve for our sauce. This is going to help thicken up our sauce because of the natural starches in the water from the pasta. And it's going to help it give it a velvety, smooth texture. But I don't need a whole lot, but I always just like to make sure I grab a little bit more than I might need because you don't want to have less than you're going to need. Okay, let me get my strainer out. And we'll pop this here. I'm going to turn off my water. I said they didn't need much. And again, you don't want to cook them to the exact doneness that you want. You want them to be a little bit under because you're going to cook them in the sauce.
Do you have a question? Have you ever thought doing like movie-inspired themes, like Ratatouille?
You know, we actually were like talking about that because we were thinking growing up, and that probably dates us, but there was always movie and a dinner. So there was a movie theme that went with like the dinner. Growing up, it was movie and a dinner and a dessert. And my husband and I were talking about that, how we used to watch that. And I felt like it was always Con Air every week on, the station. But yes, we definitely thought about doing that for it. Okay, moment of truth on our sourdough, making sure we have a beautiful pop. There we go. I made sure the other day I didn't get quite as good of a pop. I didn't proof it as long, but my kitchen has been cold because it's been a little bit colder here. And so I made sure to proof this about an hour and a half longer because it's getting full fall. And as the weather cools, it takes longer to proof. Okay, we're going to bake this now at 450 for 20 minutes with the lid off. Let me get my timer. There we go. So that is one thing. If you're new to the sourdough journey and you say you're having a lot of great luck during the summer, when it's hotter, your bread will proof faster. Your sourdough, that fermentation, all that process goes up faster because the heat speeds it up. But during the winter, if your house is cooler, it's going to take more time to do it. Let me drop it in. Not quite yet. And I remember one time, I've had two big kind of flukes that happened with mine, and then I finally figured it out. One time I put my breads in one of my outdoor fridges to proof, and I had a cold spot, and it froze part of it. That one did not bake up. And then the other one was I had it proofing, but one of my darling children left the door to the outside, and it was like 40 degrees out there. That one, my starter was so cold, it did not puff up when I fed it and was like terrible. So temperature can make a huge difference in your results in making sourdough.
You have a question? Do you have the sourdough recipe posted anywhere?
Yes, I do have the sourdough recipe card for everyone. It's like my big, I have two of them, like my traditional one and my big loaf, that's the big loaf. I feel like the big loaf always turns out a little bit better. But I do have that one, as well as videos on how to create your own starter from scratch. And all you need is flour and water, unbleached flour. That's also a key thing. And so how to make it, 7 days of how to make it, and a video on how you can create your very own sourdough bread from start to finish. Because if you're new to the journey, there are a lot of different steps involved, but it is not a hard journey. It just takes a little time, and there's a bit of terminology if you're unfamiliar, but I kind of walk you through it and we'll let you know. Looks like I had an onion that jumped out all the way over here. So there we go. I think our chicken or our oil is nice and hot, as you saw when it was going in there. I'm actually going to use, I have a preferred tongs. So let's start putting our chicken in to start frying. I'm going to turn this down to about a 5 now. So I had it heating up on an 8 on a high until when you put a drop of water in it, it sizzles. So I had that onion drop and I knew it was sizzling already. You want, go ahead. I said, when you have it hot, you want to make sure you turn it down. So get it up high and then turn it down so that you can get that great crispy fry on your chicken.
You have a question? If someone's sourdough starter has been in the fridge for months, is it still good to use?
As long as it doesn't have mold on it, it can be revived, but you're going to have to love it up for a couple of days of feeding it. I have lots of people who have kept it and they've run it there. It does need to go through like 4 days of feeding it every day to bring it back, as long as it's not moldy or has like a lot of funky discoloration. If it still looks kind of normal, just has that kind of that hooch on the top, then you should be good to go. Okay, let me get my onions tossing over here. And then we're going to throw in our garlic here in just a second. And then we'll start prepping up our vegetables for this. I'm going to turn this down to about a 2 or to 3. There we go. I'm going to put a smidge more oil in here. This is a pretty big saute pan. It's a 6-quart saute pan, which means when you use a larger pan, you're going to need to use a little bit more oil because you're going to have a bit more surface area. And if you have it under, that's when you're going to scorch your onions or your garlic or your veggies. Here we go. Okay. Let's get we'll do our mushrooms first. So I've got about a half a pound of baby bellas. We're going to slice those up. Now you could definitely just use pre-sliced mushrooms, but if you're like me and just buy produce kind of in bulk when I go, the unsliced mushrooms or the whole mushrooms last longer than the slice. The slice tend to go slimy after a couple of days versus if you leave them whole, then they'll last for a good week or 2. There we go. Now you could also use yellow or the white button mushrooms for this. I wouldn't waste a good mushroom like a chanterelle on this. Those are things that you want to have be the star of your show when you're using them, especially if you're going to pay the pretty penny for them. And I wouldn't use full-size portobello mushrooms on here because I find that they are a bit more chewy and a bit more woodsy in their flavor. There we go. Give our onions a quick stir. We got a little middle ones that are a bit crispy. Just take them out. Let's throw our garlic in and we'll let the garlic saute up. When you put your garlic in your pan, put it in for a very, very short period of time, 30 seconds max, because it is going to start sauteing up fast. You can already hear it. Garlic will go from crispy to burnt in no time at all. So we're going to give this a really quick stir up We want it to get kind of a golden brown color on it, but we don't want it to be too dark. Now, once you start adding in other vegetables, you're taking off this, the high heat of your pan, which will allow it to kind of cook a bit more evenly. There we go. Now let's add in our mushrooms. And this again is about 8 ounces of baby bellas sliced up. And we're gonna give this a good stir. Now, portobello, like mushrooms are like sponges. So I'm gonna add in a bit more oil, but I'm gonna first let it soak up. But I'm not gonna add in my regular oil. We're gonna be using some sun-dried tomatoes, and I always get, the sun-dried tomatoes that are in oil. We're gonna use that oil to season it up because this is gonna also be for the base of our sauce, and it's gonna help give you a really nice flavor, more of that sun-dried flavor than just the tomatoes. We'll add the tomatoes in a little bit, but again, I want my veggies to saute up first before I add these guys in. So I put in probably about, maybe 2 teaspoons of sun-dried tomato oil. There we go. And you can already smell it. It's just going to give it this wonderful scent to it. It's going to give it a nice flavor. Let's get our chicken flipped over here. This guy is looking perfect. I'm going to rotate. I think these ones looking good. This guy needs a little bit more. And this one, I'm going to turn it down to about a 5. I will say, half my pan cooks a little bit hotter than the rest. Let's get our mushroom sauteing up. I'm going to grab some paper towels. Now you can take your chicken out and you can place them either on a cookie drying rack, or I just like to use paper towels. So I'm just going to grab a baking sheet out. I'm going to lay my paper towels here. This is going to allow it to suck up the extra oil, which will leave you with a crispier end product. Don't just put it down on a flat surface. That's going to give you a soggy bottom to your chicken.
Yeah, question. Do you have to change the oil with each batch?
No. I put in enough oil in there that it should make it through. You want to have enough that you're not getting down to a small amount of oil. That's when you're going to get more of those burnt bits in it, and that's when you're going to have to change it. So I make sure I have plenty of oil for the amount that I'm frying. But again, you don't have to have so much that it's, sitting over. You're only going to, if you change out the oil, it's because you didn't add enough in there that it sucked it up, and you're left with some of that breading that kind of crisps up at the bottom there. There we go. Giving our things a little turn. Get this guy. Perfect. Okay. And we're going to let those kind of cook up and get nice and crispy there. While we're doing that, I'm going to prep up some asparagus that we're going to throw in to our pasta as well, because I had just a couple bits of asparagus left over. I was like, oh, these will go great in a pasta with the sun-dried tomatoes. With asparagus, you're going to want to cut off the bottom about 1 inch of the asparagus. This whole part, it's going to be more white in color and texture, is going to be, if you don't cut it off, it's going to be like chewing on a stick. It's going to be very fibrous. It's dehydrated, and it's just not going to be nice. Now I'm going to slice up and kind of chop up the rest of our asparagus so we have just kind of tips of it in there. And when I do this, I'm going to, instead of doing a flat cut, I'm going to do kind of like a julienne cut, or like a kind of a nice kind of sideways diagonal. That's just going to make it have a prettier look to it. Does it change the flavor? No, but it just makes it a little bit doing that. And what you do is, when you're doing it, is you're going to push down on your blade, and you're just going to hold it kind of flat, but at a slight angle. And then you just kind of cut through it instead of doing a push down. And that's just going to allow you to have that just prettier looking cut to it. It makes it look more professional. Because, they say presentation is like a part of it. Let's get our chicken here. See how we're cooking up. Still a little bit longer on these. Let's check on my higher heat side. You know what? That guy is just about done. Okay. So right now I've kind of got a little blonde. I want it to get a little bit darker because you want it to be crunchy. And so what I visually look for is kind of like anywhere like this kind of brownish, kind of reddish coloring. That's going to know it's a good one. You don't want to cook it to where it's completely brown, but kind of this hybrid where you've got this almost this brownish reddish thing. This, when you get to the too light of color, let me see if any of these are too light under there. Like some of that means it's going to be a bit soggy. So if you want a darker color, that means it's going to be crunchy. Okay. So this is good. So what we're going to do is also when you transfer it over, this is the greasy side. Put the greasy side down. That is going to allow it to soak it up and give you a nice crispy edge on it. If you put the greasy side up, it's going to make it soggy because that grease is going to sit in there and it's not going to have a chance to suck out and really crisp up. That one needs just a smidge longer. There we go. So we've got our first round of our crispy fried chicken going in. And let's get our next batch. And again, we're probably going to have to do 3 batches here because those 2 chicken breasts created quite a lot of chicken. And that's because when you think about it, as you go through the breading process, it is going to take up a lot more. I'm just going to leave it at these 4 in there. It's going to make a bigger surface area, bigger amount of it because it's, got that breading coating on it. So it does kind of grow. Okay. I'm going to turn this up just a smidge. It is looking pretty nice. There we go. Just flip over some of this. And then as you go, I always like to kind of what I say is you're deglazing. So scraping at these kind of bits on the bottom of your pan. When we add our pasta water in and our creams, that's going to add a lot of flavor. So I always like to try to pick it up and put it in there for the flavor. Okay. Let's add in our asparagus now. And this is about maybe a cup of asparagus chopped up. Isn't a whole lot, but it will add a nice little pop of green into our pasta. Here we go. And then I'm just going to kind of lay it out, let those continue to saute. I'm going to prep up my fresh basil and my green onions to throw in there, though we won't throw them in till the very end. I just want to get that prep done. Because we'll put our tomatoes in next and then our pasta, water, and cream. But I do want to get my herbs ready to kind of pop in at the end. So we're going to season it up with some fresh basil, green onions, and then we'll add in some dried oregano. If you have fresh oregano, that's also great. It should be. I'm looking for about, a 1/4 cup of fresh basil. Now, fresh basil it gives you a nice, really fresh flavor, but in terms of seasoning it long run, you want to add it in the very end so it keeps its fresh flavor. If you add it in too soon, it gets more muted. Okay, for my green onions, I'm going to just chop off these kind of bottom bits here. And then we're going to just do a small kind of chop on them that we can toss in our pasta at the very end. This will give it a really, really fresh flavor. You don't ever want to put your green onions in too soon because as they cook, they will lose their firmness and they will get mushy and they will dull out in their flavor. Okay. Get this little stalk out. And then we'll get this chopped up. And then I want my basil to be it doesn't have to be super fine, but enough so that we'll sprinkle over it and where you're not getting a huge leaf of fresh basil. But the basil will work really well with the sun-dried tomatoes. Okay, I've got that chopped up. Here we go. Now I'm going to add in a good amount of sun-dried tomatoes, and this is going to add just a great amount of flavor. Might have to grab a fork. Now, A little bit of this goes a long way. Sun-dried tomatoes pack a punch. They have a good amount of flavor in them. So I'm not going to use up this whole jar. I'm just going to use about half of it because that's going to add plenty of tomato flavor. Because you got to think each one of these tomatoes is a bigger one that has been dried out. So think about like grapes to raisins, the ratio here. So it's like adding a whole bunch of tomatoes in there. Okay, we're going to let these kind of saute up for just a second. And you can really smell that sun-dried tomato scent. I'm going to grab a little bit of my garlic salt and some dried oregano. We're going to put a couple shakes of dried oregano, be about like a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. And then I'm going to do a couple shakes of garlic salt. Again, about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. We might add in more later, but we'll see. I always just have a little bit on there so those veggies get that nice flavor. The tomatoes will already have a little bit of saltiness to them because as they kind of get through, they get a little bit of a more salty flavor. Now we can start adding in our pasta water. And I'm just going to add in a little bit at a time because my goal is I want to deglaze the bottom of this pan first. And as you can see, we're going to get this kind of thickening up of it. Don't just flood it all in there at one time. That won't allow you to get a nice thickness to your sauce. It'll make it too runny.
Do you have a question? Do you post the recipes?
We upload our videos to the link on our page, so you can always rewatch and cook along with us. Now, for my members, I do post about 3 recipe cards a week about different recipes we cook during the week. We'll pop those up for them. But for everybody, we do have the videos available. Here we go. Perfect. That one still needs a little bit to cook, but again, you're looking for this reddish brown color to give you the lovely kind of crispiness to it. There we go. Okay. Again, I'm going to add, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use up all this liquid, but we'll see. I had about a cup of reserved pasta water. And just again, little by little, don't flood it. Because you want it to slowly reduce down. If you flood it, then you risk your vegetables getting more soggy. And you risk ruining the texture of your sauce. There we go.
You have a question. What are the ingredients on the chicken?
So the chicken, we kept it really, really simple. So we started off with our flour. We used about 2 cups of flour. Then we added in about a tablespoon of onion powder, a tablespoon of Italian spices, a half a tablespoon of oregano, and then about a tablespoon of garlic salt. That's pretty much it. We, put it in, dredged in the flour into the egg wash, and then I added in about a cup of seasoned panko breadcrumbs for that nice extra crunch to it. And that's what's going to give you that more of that texture on it. Okay. Let's put, you know what? I'm going to use all of it because it looks like that will be the perfect amount. And now we're going to add in some cream because, again, I want it to be a lovely kind of creamy tomato sauce base for it. So we're going to add our cream in, and then we'll go grab our sourdough out of the oven, and then we'll be down to like our final touch. I'm going to add in about a half a cup. You don't need a whole lot because I don't want my pasta to be completely drenched in sauce, but enough to really kind of coat it. So again, just about a half of a cup. We can always add in a little bit more. And then I'm going to turn this down to a low to let it simmer. Let me check this real quick before I walk away. We're good. Okay. I'm going to turn it down just a smidge. Let's go get our beautiful sourdough out of the oven. Grab my trivet. And let's cancel that guy off since we're done. And now we're ready for our beautiful reveal. Look at this gorgeous sourdough. We've got our nice peak on there, beautiful kind of a light golden brown crusting to it. That's what I call like my blonde bake. I like to only cook it for 20 minutes with the lid off because I don't ever want it to get too dark in color, because that will yield a really crunchy crust, and I like it to be chewy but not overly crunchy. And you want to take it out of your Dutch oven because you're going to have this nice, beautiful blonde crust on the bottom. But here is our gorgeous traditional loaf. We kind of prepped it up yesterday and had it cold proofing for the last 24 hours in the fridge here. We've got our nice little peak and then our big expansion. And then, of course, my cute little wheat leaf design. All right, let's give our pasta sauce a little swirl. Let me check my chicken. These are looking great. I'm going to start taking them out. See, lovely, beautiful fry on each side. Okay. Again, remember to put it the greasy side down because you want it to get nice and crispy. There we go. And now I'm going to throw my last bit of chicken in, and then we're going to finish up we'll throw our pasta in, and we'll be ready to serve up. Okay, let's get this guy out of the way. I'm gonna before I bring my pasta over, I wanna taste my sauce, see if I need to add anything else to it. This is where you're gonna decide if you need a little bit more salt. And it's easier to do it now versus when you put the pasta in. I think I'm gonna do a smidge more garlic salt, and I think that's it. There we go, just a good shake. And here is our radiatore, which are these kind of cute little balls. Don't worry if they're all stuck together, because as we toss them in the sauce, they're going to break apart. So I always say, don't toss them with oil. You won't need to. That will kind of mess with your end product. As you toss them back into this sauce, they will coat themselves up and they will suck up that extra juices in your sauce to make it just lovely. Here we go. And that's what I always say. I'm like, you don't need as much creamy base as a lot of sauces. They're just completely dripping in it. I always like to have it just kind of coated up where it really flavors our pasta up lovely, but it doesn't need to be completely soaked, because you want that creaminess, but it doesn't have to be such an indulgence. Beautiful.
The question, what's the name of the pasta?
So this is I'm going to call it my sun-dried tomato pasta with mushrooms and asparagus. I just made it up because all those flavors work well together. But, the noodles. Yes, the noodles are radiatore. I might be saying it wrong. Radiatore. I always think of it like a radius and then a tori. So radiatore. I'm just making that. I'm not very good at pronouncing things. I do have my doctorate, but pronouncing things is not one of them. Okay. Let's get a little bit of Parmesan shredded. Then we will throw in our fresh spices. I'm actually, for the first time ever, using my Parmesan grater for Parmesan. I know, crazy, guys. Normally, I use my Parmesan grater for zesting fruit because it is the best at zesting fruit. And I don't often buy blocks of Parmesan cheese, but I decided I'm going to start doing it because we've just been reading all these things about, you should really just buy the blocks and shred it yourself. It's just better. And it is. But let's get this guy all shredded up. Now, this was my daughter at a restaurant, she would have the poor waiter just sit there and shred until she had this pile on there. She'll probably make me shred it over there, and she'll never say stop because she could just eat it. You want to add in about, I want to say, like a fourth of a cup of Parmesan cheese. This is just going to give you a little more creaminess to the pasta, adds a little bit of saltiness, But you don't need to have so much that you're turning it into a mac and cheese because, of course, you're going to add some more on when it's time to serve. I'll put it over here. I'm going to let it steam up for a second. Let's get our fresh basil and our green onions, and we're going to toss these guys in. Because, again, you want to add these at the very end to add that really fresh thing, and we're going to toss them into our pasta. There we go. And the nice thing, though, about if you use freshly grated Parmesan cheese, it's going to melt a lot faster than the pre-grated because the pre-grated has dried out, where the freshly grated is actually much softer and delicious pasta. Okay, look at this gorgeous pasta here. We are ready to serve up. Just let me check my chicken, see if it's ready to flip, because I'm not going to make you sit through the whole frying process. These still need a little bit longer, but I already got plenty up. So let's grab, technically, let's serve these guys in my new pasta bowls. So this is technically a pasta bowl. It's like a really shallow, big dish. I love it. I'm not gonna say. I'm a sucker. Every time Joanna Gaines comes out with something new at Target, I'm like, first in line, that's me. I have like her whole collection. It's really sad, but it's wonderful. Okay, so let's serve up our pasta. Let me get my shovel out because my shovel is meant for serving pasta. It is a shovel, a cooking shovel. Okay, for dinner tonight, we are going to have our creamy sun-dried tomato pasta with radiatore noodles, a creamy sauce made with sun-dried tomatoes, cream, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, asparagus, and green onions and fresh basil. And then we will serve it with our crispy Italian fried chicken that we seasoned with Italian seasoning, garlic salt, onion powder, and a nice panko breadcrumbing, or breadcrumb. And then for our bread, we're going to have a slice of our homemade sourdough loaf that we made for just like baked up, had it proofing for things. And then, of course, don't forget you gotta sprinkle some more Parmesan cheese over the pasta. Look at that gorgeousness. For a just easy, quick, delicious dinner. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our sun-dried tomato pasta with crispy Italian chicken and sourdough, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I have my knives, my cutting boards. I've got my 6-quart all-clad saute pan and my hex cloth, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen. I have in there for you to check out in case you're interested in what we use. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.